Greetings, friends. It's Heidi with Heidonian Living, and today I'm going to continue to talk a little bit more about energy management, but this specifically in regards to relationships, especially friendships. So one of the things that can take the most energy, and sometimes we don't necessarily identify that, is how we choose to invest time in which relationships. And some relationships energize us, some zap the energy out of us, some we don't mind that they do, right? And some we do mind that they do. Now, if you are introverted versus extroverted, you're probably a little bit more aware of this. But not necessarily, because extrovert doesn't necessarily mean outgoing. I'm naturally very introverted, but I'm an outgoing person in that I have skills and I like to connect with people, but I have to make sure that I have enough alone time to get my energy back. So extroverted versus introverted really means where you get your energy. Versus my hubby, he's way more extroverted. So if he spends too much time alone, that's unhealthy for him. Me, if I spend too much time with other people, that's unhealthy for me. And so we're all somewhere along the spectrum, and with seasons of life, it can even change as to how much alone time or people time that we need. And so that's one of the first things, is to start to be aware. If you're a praying person, like I choose to be, you may even pray about, Lord, please help me to identify those relationships that are draining to me, those that are blessing me, and whether where's that balance for me in this season of alone time versus with people time. So that's one part of learning the equation of energy management with relationships. In fact, I've heard it said many times, list the 5 people you spend the most time with. And that doesn't have to be even in person. It could be like, I feel like I spend a lot of time with Stephen Furtick. He's never met me. He may never meet me, but I listen to one of his messages literally on average at least one a week. Now some weeks it's not, and some weeks it's 2, blah blah blah, but that's one of the people who speaks into my life a lot. And so for me, that would be a total plus, right? So I want you to know, it's not just the people that you spend face-to-face hours with, but the people that are in your life, whether virtually, verbally, audibly, or physically, if that makes sense. The other person would be my husband. Obviously I spend a ton of time with him, and while it's not always perfect, right, because marriage never is, it's definitely a plus. Like, he makes me laugh, he makes me feel loved, and so I would put a plus by his name. Now, it's truly true that you can't say somebody's neutral. Either they're positive or they're negative. There is no in between. I've heard that said many times, and it's kind of uncomfortable sometimes to make that list, but it's so important. Now, if you put a negative by somebody's name, don't have guilt about that, because sometimes it's not even that they're a bad person, right? Or that they're bad for you. It's just maybe that you haven't identified a way to interact with them that can still you be you and them be them, and it be a healthy relationship. Now, sometimes those negatives do need to be moved away from. And so let's talk about that next. What to think about versus is this somebody I need to eliminate from my circle and how I invest time, or is this somebody that I need to evaluate a different way to invest that time so it can be healthier for me? And so some of the things that I think about is, do I love them? Because you don't always like everybody that you love, and if I love them but I don't like them, I may need to evaluate how I spend time with them. If I like them and love them, then I definitely need to evaluate how I spend time with them if it's a negative thing. Now, that can also lead in, I hate to use the word supposed to be, because supposed to be leads to kind of an expectation, and that can, lead to dangerous ground of where you're letting other people project how you should be on you, which is never a healthy thing to operate in your shoulds, so to speak. But you do need to think about that, and depending on your value system, for me, that's a Christ-based value system. It may not be for you. It may be some other value system. But based on my values, like, for example, I, feel like in a marriage relationship, you do everything it takes to make it work. Are there exceptions, like from abuse or those kinds of things? Absolutely. But generally speaking, I'm not going to look at backing out of that as an option for me, unless it's one of those very rare extending circumstances. Like, I don't have to be happy to want to stay because I'm committed based on my values. Does that make any sense? So that's just one example of how based on your values, you want to think about if this is a person you're supposed to love and supposed to like, if that makes any sense. And then you can begin the work, like, depending on that answer, that can lead us down a whole nother Hydonian living topic, but we won't go there today, so let's stay on task. Also, is this somebody that's damaging my relationship with God or with my family, or with my career or with other friends? Because if it is damaging, then you probably need to really evaluate and maybe even consider, not maybe elimination of that relationship, but maybe, to ask some hard questions. But it's not just because somebody annoys you or frustrates you that you automatically go, nope, you're negative, you're out of my life. No, you want to dig deeper. And for me, one of the last ways that I do that, not last like the very last, but I mean like last on my list that I'm telling you, is to pray about it. And so if you're a praying person, that can be such a huge influencer, for God to give you wisdom and discernment as to whether this is an evaluate or eliminate relationship. And if it is an evaluate, how much you need to be invested in staying in that relationship. But here's the deal. If it's an evaluate is the answer, then the next step is to think about how you might interact differently so that you can still maintain that relationship but conserve your energy. So some of the things might be, for example, I know that there's certain people that I love dearly, I even like them, but when I spend time with them, I am stinking exhausted because they maybe think different thoughts and maybe plant a thought in my head that then I have to spend energy to negate or find truth in or whatever. Like they just, they take it out of me even though I love and like them. And so that might be a person that I choose to continue to have a friendship with, but I might know that if I'm going to schedule a lunch date with them, that I need to also make sure that I don't have another emotionally requiring task for me immediately prior or immediately following that I need to have some time for me to process that, right? And to get good again, if that makes any sense, and to recharge my capacity, because we all only have so much capacity. And that's the other thing. You were built exactly with the right amount of capacity that you were meant to have. And so stop thinking you should be more like me or should be more like this person or that person, and embrace your capacity and know that it's a gift. It's a gift because that helps you be more of who you are and learning to live within that capacity. Or maybe you can do things to influence it as well. Again, we've talked about that, are you getting enough rest? Are you eating well? Just so many other things that you could do. But again, I'll stop from that tangent. So another example of how you might invest differently is if it's a person that you should like, but you just love. That sounds bad, but I hope you hear my heart as I say that. Maybe you choose to do activities in a big group, so you can still be with them, but they aren't the sole influence on you. So I'm just giving you some examples of how when you need to evaluate and not eliminate a relationship, but it does have a negative influence or an energy taking influence on you, that you can approach it differently but still maintain the relationship. So, or maybe it's, if they tend to talk and complain and moan and groan, but it's your aunt and you love her, so you feel like you want to be with her, that maybe you take her to the movies, right? So that there's not as much talk time, but you still get to be with her so she knows that you love her. Does that make any sense? And please know, I'm not referring to a real aunt. That was just an example that I used. So I hope you're kind of getting a gist here for what we're talking about. There's so much you can dig into with this. But just to review, look at the 5 people you spend the most time with, positive or negative. Think about, are you more introverted or extroverted? How much time do you need to recharge? Does being with people or by yourself recharge you? If you do find that there's some negative on your list, and they might even be positive people, but from an energy perspective, they require a lot of you. Because some of my best friends, also because we go so deep, I would even say that they're a plus on my list. But I still know if I'm going to spend time with them that I want to have downtime as an introvert before and after, because we're going to go deep and that requires a lot of me. So then if you, so we've talked about making the list. We've talked about introvert versus extrovert. We've talked about, now is this somebody based on my values that I need to reevaluate how I invest in or eliminate the relationship? or, really there's a lot of in between. A lot of times it's maybe distancing. So maybe you see them once every 2 or 3 months instead of once a week, that sort of thing. But then there's other people that sometimes it's a coworker, and so you can't eliminate them, right? But you could choose to reevaluate how you interact with them, to put systems and thoughts in place to minimize the negative impact. So I hope this helps you become more of who you're called to be and find freedom in the process.